sphere of influence of Jeffrey Epstein?
You're completely right, because there were emails that were shared by Democrats, I think in the past week or so, where there were names of diplomats from various countries attending to parties. Now, what kind of parties is a different question. Those emails just spoke about being invited to particular events, or that particular section of people there for a particular event also being hosted by Epstein. But there are different versions of Epstein's party. Some of them are purely political, rubbing shoulders, and then there are those where the activities that are not completely on the grey line, on the right side of the moral equation, and then there are some that are completely illegal. So which parties were the ones where the people were, transacting in flesh trade, were interacting with minors? That is something that would be very, very controversial. The reason why both the Republicans and the Democrats earlier had wanted to sit on this landmine was because the ripples would not just resonate throughout America. It will affect every single world leader or diplomat. So the circles are going to be very edgy to see exactly which names are going to be withheld and which names are going to come out, and who actually the Trump regime under Pam Bondi is going to protect under the Department of Justice and its grey zone.
Do you think this is enough to politically benefit Donald Trump at this stage, whether he's mentioned in the files or not? Or do you think the damage has already been done, Shruti?
See, he did take a little bit of hit. A lot of MAGA voters were unhappy that he championed the cause of full transparency, but backed out once he came into power. So that did impact it a little. Until and unless now the released files are completely unredacted, those people will continue to suspect Trump of some tomfoolery and some hot stepping around the actual issue where his names are involved. So whether the redacted portions are actually implicating Trump or a leader that he wants to protect, or his own political currency in terms of social blackmail or political blackmail, any of the redacted portions is going to look like as if Trump was part of that particular party, or Trump was part of that particular thing that we are unable to see. So he has taken his reputation within his MAGA voter bank has taken a hit in terms of transparency with this issue. Now, with the signing, he's trying to regain it. Some of them will fall for it, and some of them will continue to sit on the fence and watch how the files are released and who or which names are being named.
Yes, Shruti, do stay with us as we have further updates. But of course, moving over to the African region next, and activists have illuminated Johannesburg's skyline with projections demanding urgent reforms to address the global debt crisis and calls for climate accountability as G20 leaders are set to gather for the first summit on African soil. Sedokethlane Famodi, the director of the New Economy Hub, has criticised current global lending systems, saying that African nations now spend more on debt servicing than on public health care, with 25 allocating more to the debt than education. Let's take a listen in.
We are here tonight to project this message to the G20 leaders and their retinues who have come from all over the world, to really bring a focus to the debt crisis that is facing the majority world, and especially African countries. African countries are really good payers. They are really consistent in paying their debts, to the extent that they deny their people, their nations, the basics of life in order to be able to service their debt costs. And yet defaulting countries in Europe have their interest costs priced at a much cheaper rate. If anything, this is another kind of imperialism.
The rally comes as civil society groups urge South African President Cyril Ramaphosa to champion the debt cancellation agenda at the G20. An open letter signed by 160 organisations stressed the need for bold leadership in addressing debt burdens. While praising South Africa's advocacy for reforms, activists have called for courage from wealthier nations to implement systemic change. Joining us once again is Shruti Dasgupta, and also Andrew K.P. Leung joins us. He's a China strategist and he joins us live from Hong Kong. Andrew, I wanted to start with you. Many African nations argue that they're trapped between Western leaders and Chinese creditors. Does the G20 have any real ability to break this deadlock?
Well, let's put this debt problem in some sort of a historical context. It's not the first time that African nations facing the debt crisis. Let's trace back to about 20 or 30 years ago. The same sort of thing happened, resulting in sort of debt relief and calling for more aid. In other words, interest-free, either loans or gifts. But it didn't work because the money didn't solve the problem of poverty because what drives the economy is the capacity of the people to build their own lives, to build their own, create their own jobs, to grow the economy, and to attain a degree of self-reliance and sustainability, not just on the climate sense, but in the sustainability of the economy, rather than relying on debt. So it is another carrying call for the kind of development model for struggling nations in the Global South in particular. And of course, a number of countries in the Global South have graduated from the debt crisis. We look at some of the countries in Asia or even in Latin America. But it also points to the fact that people need to be educated in the skills. There ought to be more schools. There ought to be more infrastructure, roads, highways. So I think that this is a carrying call. And then in this context, China plays a very important role because China model is very different from the West. The West engagement with Africa is also based on the bottom line, using the so-called IMF model. Everything needs to be changed to create the market. But the market, if you look at some of the countries in Africa, they're growing coffee, they're growing soybeans. Where's the money gone? The money has go to large multinationals.
Yes.
And so the benefits don't trickle down. Whereas the people at the bottom, they lack skills, they lack education, they lack healthcare. I think that this is more important dynamics involved than just debt relief.
Okay, Shruti, I wanted to bring you in here. Is this a sign of rising global South frustration with the current international financial architecture?
Absolutely right, because the Western inclined architecture of money lending is harming the nations that are actually contributing the most to the world's GDP. And there is about 60% of the world's population, 75% of the global trade, and all of this is being represented at G20, out of which, as of now, the West represents very little in terms of both population as well as GDP. But the rules are inclined towards them very positively, whereas the African nations, who have suffered a whole lot under both the colonial rules as well as the internal civil wars that were incited by some external force or internal force, they continue to face problems, civil problems inside their own societies. How do they grow until and unless the nations that are supposed to be richer than them, they are give them a helping hand. They ensure that these places are places of where humanity itself will find a new hope. And that is something which is definitely lacking in terms of policy as far as money lending to these economies is concerned. If they are left to service their debts year after year, and there are defaulters that are given lower rates, more extensions, and more loans. My home nation's neighbor, Pakistan, being a prime example of that. They're given good, like sinking back, good money after bad in certain economies because it suits your political purpose. Then it looks very bad for the world in general. So IMF needs to rethink its policies towards African nations, as well as the Western nations need to think about how they look at African nations, not as a liability, but as a potential where growth of humanity, industry, as well as general world power can be effective.
Okay, Shruti Dasgupta, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to have you on the programme. Andrew, do stay with us as we have further updates to discuss. Now, Zambia has welcomed Chinese Premier Li Qiang to Lusaka, marking the first visit by a Chinese premier in 28 years. The trip comes as the copper-rich nation emerges from a prolonged financial crisis and works to stabilise its economy under a new, more sustainable debt repayment plan. China remains Zambia's largest official creditor with $5.7 billion owed, and Beijing is keen to showcase Zambia as a model participant in President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese officials have framed the visit as an example of how African nations can recover from financial distress with China's support. As Zambia pushes to industrialize, it is seeking fresh investment in mining, infrastructure and production capacity. China, for its part, is looking to expand exports of tractors, electrical equipment and construction vehicles into the Zambian market. Despite recent economic turbulence, the outlook is brightening. The World Bank projects that Zambia's economy will grow by 6.5% next year, outpacing its average growth of around 5% over the past 2 decades. Joining us once again is Andrew K.P. Liang. He joins us to speak about this. Andrew, of course, China remains Zambia's largest official creditor with $5.7 billion owed. Is that expected back by Beijing? And what is the time frame under this Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, of course, China's engagement with Africa is not just depending on country to country. It's also supported by a very powerful platform called the China-African Cooperation Framework or Convention, which meets every couple of years to review the roadmap ahead for the development of the individual member African countries, and also linking together with China's investment, China's aid program, China's technology training program. The whole idea is to ensure that there is a sustainable path for the various backward African countries, how to rise from poverty, how to address their incapacity and their total dependence on foreign aid, to build up their resilience, relying on their huge resources. Let's not forget that Africa is the world's remaining pasture for arable land. But a lot of land is out of nowhere. They're not connected by roads, highways, bridges, ports, let alone the lack of hospitals, schools for the children. So, and all this lack of capacity of infrastructure, of connectivity with the outside world translates into a downward spiral towards poverty and dependence. I think that these challenges China has been grasping, together with the older models, some of blowback against China's engagement in terms of lack of transparency in some of the projects, the lack of attention to the local environment, the lack of involvement with the local stakeholders. So I think the modern Belt and Road Initiative has now been revised and rejigged to focus on more smaller projects, focusing on the ecology, focusing on sustainability, including debt sustainability, because a lot of debt in the past was given to just to the demands of the local governments without realizing, without analyzing in depth how sustainable these debts are, rather than just jack up the debt numbers. So I think that it's not just debt, it's the sustainability, it's capacity building, and also you could throw in the ecology, climate change. A lot of the poor countries, they struggle to cope with the ravages of more acute weather conditions, more drought, and then they don't have the money to build the capacity. And then that also impact on their development trajectory. So all these problems are going to be addressed in the forum in Africa.
Yes, Andrew KP Leung, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Always a pleasure to get your insight. We now move on, and Germany has formally returned a collection of 12 cultural artefacts to Ethiopia, marking a significant step in ongoing global efforts to repatriate African heritage. The ceremony, held at Addis Ababa University's Ras Mekonnen Hall, brought together Ethiopian officials, diplomats and scholars. The items, among them shields, crowns and traditional paintings, were originally brought to Germany in the 1920s by diplomat Fritz Weiss. His grandson, Professor Raymond Weiss, personally handed the collection over to Dr. Johann Egede's Institute of Ethiopian Studies. The German embassy coordinated the return alongside the institute, calling it an important gesture of cultural partnership. The move comes as museums and governments worldwide face increasing pressure to return artifacts taken during colonial-era missions. An accompanying exhibition, more than 50 photographs from the Weiss family archive, is set to open at the Goethe Institute, offering rare glimpses into the Ethiopia of the 1920s. Now we move on, and Nigerian security armed forces are still searching for 24 schoolgirls abducted by unidentified armed men from a secondary school in the northwestern town of Maga in Kebbi State. Authorities have said that one of the girls managed to escape, but the school's vice principal was killed. Meanwhile, in a separate attack on a church in western Nigeria, gunmen killed 2 people during a service that was recorded and broadcasted online. Both the church attack and girls' abduction come after US President Donald Trump earlier this month threatened military action over what he described as the killing of Nigeria's Christians, a narrative rejected by the Nigerian government. And that's a wrap on the Africa Brief. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Trending Tech on here, NewsX World, where we bring you the latest trends, gadgets and tech breakthroughs from around the globe. Cyber attacks on governments have become a growing and sophisticated threat, driven by geopolitical tensions, espionage and financial motives. A recent report by Microsoft suggested that Russia has increased cyber attacks against NATO states by 25% in the past year. The most targeted sector has been government, with the United States, the UK and Ukraine among the top victims. This rise in cyber activity is what the European Union calls Russia's hybrid warfare strategy, which includes a range of unconventional tactics such as cyber attacks, drone incursions and intelligence operations. Amid this, experts now warn that these cyber activities are pushing the boundaries of what can be considered warfare in the digital age. To talk about this ongoing issue is Kaptilov Arseny. He is the CEO and co-founder of water treatment engineering company Aquarime LLC and ambassador for peace in the Universal Peace Foundation. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you. Let's get straight into it.
Yeah, Alex. Nice to meet you here.
Great for you to be with us. What exactly constitutes a cyber attack, and how does it differ from other types of digital threats?
It's a very actual topic now, so let's have a little conversation about it. I think it's great nowadays we can still talk all of the world about problems and real situation in the world. About cyber attacks. Cyber attacks in digital world now is, I think, the most important problem we have, because all our data of common people, government, of technological data and influence on this infrastructure is under attack now. Because cyber attack is hacking, encryption, destabilizing system of whole countries maybe. Sometimes it's about companies, sometimes it's about banking system. and it's very scary nowadays. Maybe 10 or 15, 20 years ago, we watched this situation in movies and think without, oh, it would never happen. It's maybe thousands and thousands further, but now we can see that we are living in this age. So it's very, very important problem now. And with the whole world, we need to understand how to solve it and to work with it.
Yes, and why are governments and organisations so vulnerable to these cyber attacks? And of course, what can be done to improve their defences?
The main reason, of course, for government is to protect itself, information, data, infrastructure. And from another side, of course, as we know from books, that the best protection is attack. So the second part of this war is about to get data from other countries and get access to influence their infrastructure, include banking, generation, etc. The main problem now is that maybe 10 years ago, this situation with data was not so wide. It's new business, it's new system. Maybe 10 years ago, IT was not popular, and now we see that all infrastructure is based in old-fashioned and very old system. And for government, it's very difficult to hire advanced specialists with their salaries to invest a lot of money, huge amount of money to protect the system of whole country. Imagine, we hear every day that in some little companies is problems with hacking, with lose of data of its clients, but it's little company, and to protect it, it's very simple. But if we see that these companies have a problem, imagine, country, government, it's great aim for attacking, for finding loopholes in systems, and now governments need to invest billions, trillions of dollars to protect it. And now that's the main problem. They don't have money from one side. They can't afford to hire best specialists from another side, because all huge companies in the world, like, I don't know, Apple, Microsoft, Google, are interested in such specialists. And you can't go to labor market and say, guys, hello, please come to us. No, you can't find them. So that's the main reason about this situation with loopholes in government systems.
Yeah, and Kaptilov, we've seen an increase in these state-sanctioned cyber attacks, of course, in recent years. What do these attacks play in geopolitical strategy and international relations?
As usual, as 20, 30 years ago, spies tried to find information, collect it, and know mind of enemies, plans of enemies. Now the same is cyber espionage. You need to have access to diplomatic, military, economical information. You need to have information for sabotage or show forces, attacks on public services, infrastructure, and etc. Pressure on assets, and make some bullshit information for people and the nation. That situation is opposite. Now we live in a time of fakes, and who own real information rules the world. It's the simple thing. So that's the reason all governments now are interested in develop cyber attacks to their enemies, sometimes to their partners, because information from partners is maybe very important too. Today you are friend, tomorrow you are enemy. So
yeah, and do you think major cyber attacks are effectively now an act of war? And do you think countries should start treating them as such?
I think the situation is very interesting now because now countries are playing in hybrid warfare. So we can see that, for example, America is playing a lot of games, a lot of conflicts, real conflicts, offline conflicts, let's name them this type, all over the world. But from another side, in shadow zones like cyber, a lot of acts too. So this is hybrid warfare. Now countries don't operate only with offline or online separated. Now everyone operated with complicated systems. You can see now in a war between Russia and Ukraine, a lot of drones are using with artificial intelligence. So, and you see that protect from them is very difficult. But if you ruin IT infrastructure of your enemy can't operate its own drones, but you can.
Yeah.
And this muscle, you can change the war in one button. And it's very, very scary now because all military, all resources now is based on IT. So that reason to protect it, it's the first idea now. It's not so easy to grab tank, steal tank, or to steal jet fight, but it's simple to steal information, to steal influence, and to steal control on IT infrastructure. And now your drones become your enemy's drones.
Yeah, and Kaptilov, of course, it's important not to speculate, and of course, this is an extreme example. But what is the worst case scenario when it comes to a cyber attack? For example, could one single coordinated attack shut down a country's entire infrastructure, for example?
Yes, it's the main aim. If you can shut down the country infrastructure, for example, imagine you live in India, Russia, America, and you wake up and you can't use your bank accounts, can't use your bank application, you can't use your cable TV. A lot of cars now are with IT inside it, with soft inside it. You can't use them. You can't turn on your electricity in your flat or to cook your sandwich in the morning. No victims, no real victims. Nobody is killed, but you are scary. It's disaster. And this disaster can be realized only with one button, from one man like you, me, or others sitting in front of computer and can do it. That's nowadays IT specialists are so well paid and important guys.
Yeah, and finally, do you think, of course, the world has nuclear non-proliferation treaties, organizations like the United Nations? Do you think it's time that the world develops something similar, but for cyber warfare instead?
I hope that really governments all over the world will think about it and will seriously come to these tasks, because our world is very big and there are enough resources for everyone. And from my point of view, it's my personal opinion, the whole world can live in peace and think about more strategic ideas. For example, how to win above cancer, or about other sickness and illness we can't, or about how to people live longer or happy life. So I hope that government will sit on the table and during negotiations decide to create a real instrument, organization, or something like it, to protect common people from all these problems and all this disaster with IT infrastructure. Because developing it, it's very good, but sustainability, and I think everyone understands that sustainability of each system is very important. You can't create everything. Let's remember Babylon Tower. it was a great example because it was sustainable. Once everyone started to talk different languages, and this project was ruined.
Yes. Yeah.
So now we can see the same. If sustainability of all this modern system won't be achieved, we can see, I'm afraid of it, that we can see a ruined world. And I hope that big smart guys in governments, presidents, heads of corporations really will sit during negotiations and find solution to protect world from these disasters. Really.
Well, Capital of Arseny, thank you very much for joining us on Focal Length. Well, that's all we have time for here on Trending Tech. Thank you very much for joining us here on the programme, and stay tuned on NewsX World for more international updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things. And
welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. Thousands of people, primarily members of Generation Z, are marching in major Mexican cities to protest against widespread crime, corruption and government impunity. The demonstrations, which were partly sparked by the recent assassination of an anti-crime mayor, resulted in clashes with police in Mexico City, injuring at least 120 people. Now, to talk about this, joining us is Alex Gonzalez Umarod. He is the editor-in-chief of the Mexico Political Economist. He's also edited and written for publications including White Paper, Rest of World, America's Quarterly, Hyperallergenic, Nexos, and more. He also consults widely on political and economic matters across Latin America. Today, he will be discussing the latest developments in Mexican politics, the economic implications of recent policy decisions, the regional political trends in Latin America, and their impact on global business. Thank you very much for joining us, Alex Gonzalez Umarod. Let's get straight into it. My first question to you is, what is driving the recent wave of Gen Z-led protests across Mexico, and how are authorities responding to this new generation of politically engaged youth?
So those are two different questions. The first answer is there are two main motivations behind the protests. The number one is the perfectly legitimate anger at what is going on in Mexico, the violence and the lack of security that has been going on for decades now. The other half is, of course, the fact that there is clearly a force behind the scenes that is pushing for this sort of protest. And this will answer your second question, which is that ultimately, I'm not quite sure that this is a Gen Z protest. There are a few young people, but you look at the demographics of the people actually marching, and they are by far boomers, older people, people who aren't actually Gen Z. You see the way the communication is done, how it's done. I think ultimately what you can conclude is this wasn't a protest by politically engaged youth. This is actually more clearly a protest by organizers who haven't quite revealed themselves. I don't know if there's anything too sinister. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that the opposition in Mexico is very discredited. And so it often mobilizes in a covert way so as not to show its true colors.
Yes, and Alex, following on from that, another leading story coming out of Mexico, of course, would be the recent harassment incident involving President Sheinbaum. And what does that incident reveal about broader security lapses and the polarized political climate in Mexico right now?
It's a disgrace for many reasons, of course. The sexual harassment of the president is not only disgusting because of the fact that it is the sexual harassment of a woman, any woman. It is the president of Mexico who should have had a far more stringent security contingent, literally hours after the brutal murder of a very popular mayor in a different state. You have this man coming up from behind her and groping her. Completely unacceptable, both in moral terms, but also in terms of her security unit.
Yes, and of course we've mentioned about the killing of this mayor in Mexico. How does this incident speak of the law and order situation in the country?
Mexico is a very big country with a very complex system of security apparatuses, cartel relationships. And so when we talk about Mexico, we're actually talking about a series of different places. A really tragic stat that I like to tell people is that 50% of all the brutal violence going on in Mexico is concentrated in just a tiny handful of Mexico's 2,000 municipalities, which on one side means there are places like the Yucatan Peninsula, which is safer than Canada. You've got Mexico City, which is safer than New York or Washington, D.C. But then you've got places like Michoacán, Uruapan, where the mayor was killed, where there is violence unlike anywhere else in the world that we've seen. And so that's the enormous complexity about Mexico. Loads of violence concentrated in very, very specific places.
It's very interesting, and the United Nations has, of course, rated Mexico as one of the most violent countries for women in the world. We have seen many Mexican women now demanding access to women-only taxis and rideshare services. And what does this say about the current state of their safety? What is the government doing to combat this also?
Mexico, again, is a very polarized place when it comes to this. Obviously, feminicides are rampant, and they have been classified as such by the government. But there are also lots of interesting solutions going on across the country. Mexico is one of the few places in the world that has pretty much complete gender parity in politics. So more than 50% of the Congress is women, more than 50% of the judiciary is women, our president is a woman, and yet, to a great extent, that underscores the terrible plight of women, that even in these conditions where women are represented fairly in politics, even then they're under enormous threat in Mexico.
Let's now move on to the country's relationship with the broader continent. How does Mexico's internal challenges within the broader political and social shifts happening across Latin America, from economic instability to rising authoritarianism tendencies?
Mexico's an interesting place because it's bucked a lot of trends recently. As the rest of the world moves to the right, Mexico's left-wing government has consolidated. That worries a lot of people because they see the consolidation of a massive party, sort of reminiscent to India's Congress Party. That worries a lot of people because they say it'll become overbearing, authoritarian, and repress the rest of the opposition. The issue to me is they've won it so far relatively fair and square. It's after years of right-wing misgovernment of Mexico that the left-wing government was introduced into Mexico by democratic mandate on a massive scale. President Sheinbaum, even though her ratings have gone down since this violence, is still an enormously popular president who can mobilize enormous forces to her. The issue is, I think, on the opposition side, a lot of the claims about dictatorship and authoritarianism actually come from the ineptitude of the opposition, which is not able to capitalize on a lot of the legitimate anger in Mexico properly. You can see it through how they've tried to jump onto these protests. So they say they're completely nonpartisan, and yet I only see partisan and party political representatives talking about it on the television. And so to me, that represents the fundamental issue of Mexico's opposition. It has a lot of people it can and should work with, and yet it is completely unable to, through corruption, through the fact that they've been destroyed at the polling booths, and they're still sort of recuperating.
Now, given current tensions over migration, trade and fentanyl trafficking, how would you characterize the state of US-Mexico relations today and where they are likely headed in 2025 under Sheinbaum's leadership?
The state of US-Mexico relations at the moment is surprisingly good. When it comes to security, it's sort of shocking because you see US Secretary of State Marco Rubio coming to Mexico, and he is famously a very hard man when it comes to representing America's interests. And he came to Mexico to say that bar none, Mexico is the best partner they have when it comes to security. So Mexico and the US are working very, very closely because they have a common enemy, which is organized crime. So on that front, I think we have a lot of positive work going on, a lot of intelligence sharing, and beyond the posturing, a lot of collaboration. The issue comes when it comes to trade. Trade is a big issue for the United States because it is woken up to the fact that China is nipping at its heels, not only in cheap imports, but also in high technology. So they're having to reconfigure. I think at first they thought from the United States that they could basically isolate and do an America first and an only America vision of manufacturing and commerce and services. They've realized that they don't have enough people or the capacity to do that, especially not in the short term. And so that's where Mexico comes in. Mexico is essential to the United States, not only because we send them most of their products when it comes to manufacturers, when it comes to agricultural services, etc., but also in terms of security. The United States can't keep up with China's pace unless it's working alongside Mexico, which doesn't just provide cheap labor, which is the sort of classic excuse that people use, but rather specialized labor that Americans are simply not doing anymore. And so a lot of the US auto manufacturing sector depends on Mexico's, for example. It's not that you could get rid of Mexico, cut off Mexico, and then suddenly have a thriving US auto manufacturers sector. You'd actually get the opposite. You'd hurt them. And so I think that's what President Trump has started to realize slowly but surely, as he realizes how deeply integrated Mexico and the United States are. It's an issue he wants to deal with. He thinks some things are unfair, but I think he's come to realize that Mexico is a net asset for the US, not a problem.
Alex Gonzalez-Ormerod, thank you very much for joining us here on Focal Length. A fascinating conversation about a fascinating country. But with that, it's a wrap on this episode of Focal Length. For more international news updates, stay tuned on NewsX World. Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. US President Donald Trump says he has signed a bill requiring the release of government documents on Jeffrey Epstein. Trump, who had earlier opposed the measure, announces on Truth Social that he has just signed the bill. Senior Pentagon officials, led by Army Secretary Dan Briscoe, arrive in Kyiv to meet President Zelensky and discuss efforts to end the war with Russia. The visit comes as reports emerge of a new peace plan and after a Russian strike kills 26 people in Ternopil. Ukraine says at least 26 people are killed and dozens are missing after Russian drones and missile strikes hit apartment blocks in the Ukrainian city of Ternopil. Officials say nearly 100 are injured as Russia launches hundreds of drones and missiles, damaging energy and transport sites. A Philippine court sentences former Mayor Alice Guo to life imprisonment after finding her guilty of human trafficking. Authorities say Guo, later identified as a Chinese national, ran for office under false Filipino identity. Sudan's Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan says his council is ready to work with the United States and Saudi Arabia to help end the conflict. The statement thanks regional mediators and follows President Trump's pledge to coordinate efforts with Gulf states to stop the fighting. The Israeli military says Hezbollah is violating a ceasefire by rebuilding operations in southern Lebanon near the Israeli border. It says dozens of sites, including headquarters and weapons stores in civilian homes, have been identified around the village of Beit Leaf. Hamas condemns new Israeli airstrikes in Gaza as a dangerous escalation, warning they threaten an already fragile ceasefire. Israel says the strikes respond to a Hamas violation, while medics report at least 25 people killed in the last 24 hours. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman meets members of Congress in Washington as he promotes deepening economic and security ties. The visit follows a lavish White House welcome from President Trump, who again defends him over the 2018 Khashoggi killing. Those are the headlines of the hour, and we start this bulletin in the Indo-Pacific. And Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te has signalled support for Japan as regional tensions in East Asia continue to rise. Earlier today, he shared images of himself having a sushi lunch made with Japanese yellowtail from Kagoshima and scallops from Hokkaido. This social media display comes amid growing friction between Tokyo and Beijing. Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, has recently remarked that any attack on Taiwan can threaten Japan's security and could lead to a military response. China later indicated it may ban Japanese seafood imports in its ongoing dispute over Taiwan. Moreover, the Taiwanese government has faced similar import bans from China in recent years, targeting products such as pineapples and fish. Taipei has characterized these actions as part of a broader pressure campaign. Meanwhile, at a briefing in Beijing, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has reiterated its position that Taiwan is part of China and said that it remains a non-negotiable stance. Following this ongoing tension between China and Taiwan, Taiwan's leadership has called for stronger support for Japan, including more travel and increased purchases of Japanese goods. Officials have said that such actions would help demonstrate friendship between the two sides. Joining us now is Dmytro Burstev. He's a junior research fellow at the Institute of Oriental Studies in Ukraine, joining us from Taipei. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It is a pleasure to have you. Dimitro, a sushi lunch with Japan's envoy, a clear, deliberate public gesture here. What exactly is Taiwan signaling to both Beijing and Japan with this move?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that Taiwan sees Japan as the first ally who actually gonna help them in case of any conflict, and actually situation with Chinese-Japanese relations and the friction in relations gives Taipei a chance to become closer to Japan actually. Pretty good chance actually.
Yes, and of course, China now says that trade cooperation with Japan has been severely hit, with China also floating the banning of Japanese seafood imports over to Beijing. Is Beijing using the same economic coercion playbook as, for example, in South Korea in 2017?
Yes, especially China will use all the tools to press Japan. So banning the seafood is one of the tools, and we can see that, well, Chinese also proclaim that they don't want Chinese citizens go to Japan for traveling. So it's another tool of influence which can be also very pressing for Japan. And even as the Chinese airlines, they claim that they will cancel the flights for Chinese who already booked the flights without any fees, additional fees, and return the money.
Yes, and Dimitro, of course, it has been just a few weeks since the APEC summit where we saw the new Japanese Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, shake hands with Chinese President Xi Jinping. A lot has obviously happened since then, with these tensions seem to be escalating on a daily basis. How do you see this situation playing out?
Well, at the same time, the Japanese Prime Minister also met with Taiwanese representative in ASEAN Forum. So it's also a very important sign that Japan isn't interested in stable Taiwan. So I suppose these frictions will be over like within 3-4 weeks, but because nobody interested in sharpening the situation at the moment. However, I think escalation might continue even longer.
Okay, Dimitro, do stay with us as we have further updates from, of course, this developing situation. And ties between Japan and China have deteriorated further after recent comments by Japan's new Prime Minister on a potential security threat from ongoing China-Taiwan conflicts. China has said that its trade cooperation with Japan has suffered a significant setback since those remarks were made. According to the Chinese Commerce Ministry, Japan's position has damaged their bilateral engagement, further adding that Beijing could take extra measures if Tokyo continues to maintain the same stance. In the past week, China has said that Japan's seafood import procedures were insufficient, signaling that a full ban could be implemented within months. Beijing has also halted talks on resuming Japanese beef imports and threatened further action unless Tokyo reversed its position. The issue of Taiwan remains a central point of contention as China maintains its claim over the island, while Japan continues to monitor regional security developments very closely. Dimitro joins us once again. Dimitro, of course, partners in East Asia now seeming to deteriorate. Tensions between the two countries historically troubling. However, now it seems that things are deteriorating to a very bad level when it comes to trade. Can, of course, who will suffer more greatly here, China or Japan, when it comes to the prohibition of exports to both countries if it is to continue?
I suppose Japan is in a more vulnerable position in this case because of the size of the economics and actually specific branches of industries which are export related for Japan and ties with China. And actually, it's not the first time this the friction happened in relations between China and Japan, but it seems like the frictions right now are the most severe within the last decade.
Okay, Dmytro Burstev, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you on the programme. We now move over to West Asia for our next story, and Israel has launched new airstrikes on Gaza early this morning as both sides accused each other of violating the ceasefire that came into effect on October the 10th. Gaza's Civil Defense Agency says 3 people were killed and 15 others were injured after a residential building was hit in the Bani Shwela area of eastern Khan Yunis at around 4 a.m. local time. Authorities say the strike stopped after 5 a.m, but reports of ongoing artillery fire continue from the Khan Yunis region. The Israeli military is yet to comment on the strikes, however. Humanitarian agencies are closely monitoring developments as civilians in the area continue to face severe risk. Joining us now here on the programme is Sander van Hoorn, a former EU correspondent, and he joins us live from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World, Sander. Pleasure to have you. Israel says that 3 people have been killed in these new recent strikes. This, of course, follows over 20 killed yesterday. What's triggering this violence, and what effects does it have on this already fragile ceasefire in place in the Gaza enclave?
It all started, according to Israel, when 3 of its troops were attacked allegedly by Hamas. Hamas denies they attacked Israeli troops, but that sparked this current flare-up of violence. And most recent figures provided by the Hamas-run Ministry of Health in Gaza point to over 30 people killed so far. And Hamas is blaming Israel for violating the ceasefire. Now, the second part of your question, the fragility of this ceasefire, it holds as long as both parties still say it holds and don't say it doesn't. So for now, both parties say they will stick to the ceasefire. We've seen flare-ups in the past, but every flare-up, of course, carries the risk of a major escalation that will not be brought to an end swiftly.
Yeah, and obviously, Sander, there are talks of now what is going to be included in this second phase, an international stabilization force, among other terms. But of course, the sticking point here is the disarmament of Hamas. If this violence does continue, of course, from both sides, allegedly, what are your hopes for the future of this second phase being implemented?
Well, the upside is that the Americans are still involved. That is what got this whole process moving, and their continued involvement is necessary to basically keep both parties, Hamas as well as Israel, to stick to the Trump 20-point plan. And according to this plan, yes, Hamas will be disarmed, but Israel has to withdraw further to the Israeli border of Gaza, something that has not happened yet as well. So both sides will have to take steps, but you see the international community preparing for this phase 2. So yes, there will be an international stabilization force, but who will take part? Will it be Azerbaijan? Will it be Indonesia? Will they be able and willing to confront Hamas in the process of disarmament? And there's even thoughts that go even further ahead. For example, the European ministers of foreign affairs today are discussing training a police force for Gaza. Well, that is like a dot on the horizon, but the first step, of course, is to make people on the ground, the Israelis and the Hamas fighters, understand that they will have to stop fighting in order to proceed with phase 2.
Yes, Sander, do stay with us as we move over from West Asia into Eastern Europe. And of course, a senior Pentagon official led by US Army Secretary Stan Briscoe have arrived in Kiev to discuss efforts to end the war with Russia. Their visit follows reports of a new US-Russia framework peace plan allegedly drafted by Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff and Russia's Kirill Dmitriev, which could require major concessions from Ukraine, including giving up remaining territory in the Donbass and reducing its military. Neither Washington nor Moscow has confirmed the plan, however, but US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said a durable peace will require difficult but necessary concessions. European leaders, including Kaja Kallas and Joan Noel Barrot, warned that any plan must have Ukrainian support and cannot involve capitulation. The report surfaced the same day as a Russian attack on Ternopil killed at least 26 people. Ukrainian officials say Zelensky and Trump have already agreed to stop the conflict along the current front lines and discuss security guarantees. Driscoll's delegation is the most senior US military team to visit Kiev under Trump, focusing on battlefield conditions and possible ceasefire plans. Meanwhile, details of the 28-point Witkoff-Dmitriev plan continue to circulate, though Ukraine maintains it will not cede territory, and Russia says its original demands remain unchanged. Joining us once again is Sander van Hoorn to discuss this ongoing situation in Russia and Ukraine. Sander, this is the most senior US delegation to visit Kiev under the second Trump administration. Before we get into the aspects of this new peace plan by Dmitriev and Witkoff, what message is Washington trying to send by dispatching this delegation to Kiev right now?
They want this war to be over. They want another peace deal that Trump can claim he made possible. And the pressure is now on the Ukrainians. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is under heavy fire already internally because of corruption scandals. And now he's facing a deal that he, from his perspective, cannot possibly agree on.
Yeah, and Sander, of course, with Ukraine reportedly losing territory on the battlefield, both in Donetsk and other regions. This 28-point plan reportedly calls for Ukraine to give up the remaining Donbass and scale down some of its military, while Ukraine will receive security guarantees from the Trump administration. Of course, Zelensky has reiterated time and time again its territorial integrity will remain as it is. Do you think this 28-point plan, if the reports do turn out to be true, could be remotely acceptable to Kiev, given the current circumstances?
Well, if you have to draw lines from past remarks by Zelensky, then it will be in no way acceptable. He does not even want to talk about ceding the Crimea region of Ukraine, which has been held by Russia for a long time. And it would not only mean this 28-point plan as we know it from leaks that have transpired so far. It wouldn't only mean like ceding the parts of the Donbas region that are being held by Russia right now. It would mean ceding all of Donbas, so also the parts that are being held by Ukraine right now. Now, that's not only about ceding territory, it's also about being able to defend what's left of Ukraine, because the most active front lines, but also the most active defensive lines that Ukraine holds are located in the Donbas region. So that's a very worrying point. Now, the other points you talked about, like reducing the size of the Ukrainian army and ceding long-range missiles, that is something that may be discussed by Ukraine. They have stated so in the past, but that will also depend on the guarantees, the security guarantees being provided by the Europeans, but notably, of course, by the Americans. And about that detail of the 28-point plan, nothing has transpired so far. So the extent and the toughness of those American security guarantees, a lot of things will depend on that. But the territorial concessions, I think, for any Ukrainian president at this point will be a no-go.
Okay, so Sander, once again, I do request you stay with us for our last update coming out of the Ukraine conflict. And EU foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels amid reports of growing pressure on Ukraine to consider a secretive draft peace plan that would require major concessions for Kyiv. The plan, reportedly developed by a US envoy and a Kremlin advisor, would give Russia sweeping control over Ukraine's military and political structure and is widely seen as a form of capitulation. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said any proposal must be backed by both Ukrainians and Europeans to be viable. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot also said peace cannot mean surrender for Kyiv and called for a ceasefire along the contact line to begin any serious discussions. Let's in fact listen in to some comments made by the diplomat.
What we as Europeans have always supported is a long-lasting and just peace, and we welcome any efforts to achieve that. Of course, for any plan to work, it needs Ukrainians and Europeans on board. So this is very clear.
Discussions should start with a ceasefire on the contact line that allow for negotiation on the question of territories, on the question of security guarantees. We have said that, the US have said that, President Trump has said that, and Ukrainians are ready for this. The only obstacle to such ordered discussions so far is Vladimir Putin.
Involved. I don't know what the involvement of Ukraine has been in this plan, but obviously for us it is important that whatever peace plan is on the table, that Ukraine is behind it. This is up to Ukraine. It's about Ukrainian territory. It's about Ukrainian sovereignty. So without a buy-in of Ukraine, you won't get the support of the Europeans.
Sander Van Hoorn joins us once again. Do you think both the Russians and the Americans are looking at Europe to make any decisions here? Kaja Kallas, of course, says that the plan needs support from Europeans. Does this mean the EU is preparing to openly resit any US-Russia framework imposed from the outside of these discussions?
Well, the problem for the Europeans right now, the foreign ministers meeting in Brussels as we speak, is that they are not privy to the details of the plan. They have not been part of the negotiations about this plan, and that is a big frustration. So will they, just as Ukraine, be left second-guessing what the Americans and the Russians agree upon, and will they be left to pay the bill in the end? That is the questions that will be raised in Brussels today. And can Ukraine actually resist the Americans if they don't agree with the plan? Because the problem is that Ukraine is getting the most of the money from the Europeans, but most of the weapons that are being delivered, and sometimes they are paid for by the Europeans, those are American weapons. So there's only a certain extent that you can say no to the Americans. But the Europeans, and you could hear it in the quotes that you just aired, the Europeans are increasingly worried and frustrated about the way these talks between Russia and America are going.
Sander Van Hoorn, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have had your insight here on the programme. We now move on, and at least 26 people have been killed, including 3 children, in a Russian missile strike and drone attack in the western city of Ternopil in Ukraine. The strikes reportedly hit 2 blocks of flats in the western city of Ternopil. Ukrainian President Zelensky has said that 22 people remain missing at the site of the Russian attack in the Ukrainian territory. Ukraine's Air Force said that it had shot down 442 out of 476 drones and 41 out of 48 missiles launched by Russia during the strikes. Energy facilities, transport and civil infrastructure were also damaged elsewhere in western Ukraine. Electrical supplies are already being rationed, and after the latest attacks, the Energy Ministry announced more power cuts across the country. We, of course, will keep you updated on everything coming out of the conflict as soon as we get it here on NewsX World. Now we move over for our final story to South Asia, and as the air quality index in Delhi continues to hover at hazardous levels, residents called for the government to take more action to mitigate the city's crippling pollution crisis. The city's air quality index was recorded at 399, ranked as very poor as per SAFAR, a weather forecasting agency. Delhi and surrounding districts are often covered in smog during winter, as cold, dense air traps emissions from vehicles, construction sites and crop burning pushes pollution levels to among the highest in the world. The Delhi government has imposed a ban on non-essential construction work, among other measures, to deal with the rising pollution levels. Meanwhile, here is what some residents of New Delhi had to say about the state of pollution in the capital.
सर ये पोल्यूशन अब से थोड़ी 10 साल से 15 साल से चल रहा है। इसका कोई स्थायी इलाज नहीं है जब तक सरकार इसके ऊपर गंभीर रूप से काम नहीं करेगी। आप सोच रहे हो गाड़ियाँ बंद करा दो, इवन रोड करा दो, इससे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ने वाला। टारगेट रखो कि साल के कम से 2 करोड़ पेड़ दिल्ली में लगाने हैं, ये टारगेट रख के चलो। आप सोचोगे आज गाड़ी बंद करा दूँ, कल बिल्डिंग बंद करा दूँ। सरकारी बिल्डिंगों के काम चल रहे हैं, प्राइवेट बंद कर देते हो, इससे कहाँ पोल्यूशन रुकेगा? और कोई सरकार गंभीर नहीं है। पराली हज़ारों सालों से चल रही है, तब दिल्ली में पोल्यूशन नहीं आता। एक ही महीने सोचते पोल्यूशन है, पूरे साल की ये हालत है दिल्ली में।
सर जी ये पोल्यूशन कम होना चाहिए। अब देखो इस पोल्यूशन के चक्कर में मेरी वाइफ इतना बीमार हो रही है कुछ नहीं, उसके चक्कर में सुबह सुबह आना पड़ रहा है मेरे को। हालांकि सरकार कहती है कि सुबह सुबह मत आओ पार्क, मगर क्या करें, मजबूरी है, उसको कम करना चाहिए पोल्यूशन।
Now that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. President Donald Trump says he has signed a bill requiring the release of government documents on Jeffrey Epstein. Trump, who had earlier opposed the measure, announces on Truth Social that he has just signed the bill. Senior Pentagon officials led by Army Secretary Dan Briscoe arrive in Kyiv to meet President Zelensky and discuss efforts to end the war with Russia. The visit comes as reports emerge of a new peace plan and after a Russian strike kills 26 people. Ukraine says at least 26 are dead and dozens are injured and missing after a Russian drone and missile strike hit apartment blocks in Ternopil. Officials say nearly 100 are injured as Russia launches hundreds of drones and missiles damaging energy and transport sites. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman meets members of Congress in Washington as he promotes deepening economic and security ties with the United States. The visit follows a lavish White House welcome from President Trump, who again defends him over the 2018 Khashoggi killing. Hamas condemns new Israeli airstrikes in Gaza as a dangerous escalation, warning they threaten an already fragile ceasefire. Israel says the strikes respond to a Hamas violation, while medics report at least 25 people killed in the latest attacks. Sudan's army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan says his council is ready to work with the United States and Saudi Arabia to help end the conflict. The statement thanks regional mediators and follows President Trump's pledge to coordinate efforts with Gulf states to stop the fighting. The Israeli military says Hezbollah is violating a ceasefire by rebuilding operations in southern Lebanon near the Israeli border. It says dozens of sites, including headquarters and weapons stores in civilian homes, have been identified around the village of Beit Lif. Australia says a compromise deal will make Turkey the host of next year's COP31 summit, while Canberra leads the government negotiations. The agreement ends a long standoff between the two countries after both refused to withdraw their bids. Now, our top story of the hour comes from the United States, and President Donald Trump says he has signed a bill requiring his administration to release government-held documents related to the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Trump, who had initially opposed the measure, reversed course as the legislation gained momentum in Congress. He announced the signing on his Truth Social platform, declaring he had just signed the bill to release the Epstein files. The move follows comments from U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, who vowed maximum transparency after both chambers of Congress, now under Republican control, voted to mandate the release. Bondi confirmed the Justice Department will publish its Epstein-related materials within 30 days, as the law requires. The release is expected to shed new light on Epstein's activities before and after his 2008 conviction. The case has lingered over Trump politically, fueled in part by conspiracy theories he has echoed to supporters and by lingering public skepticism surrounding Epstein's 2019 jailhouse death, officially ruled a suicide. Let's listen in to U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi.
What are you doing here over the next 30 days as we understand it?
We will continue to follow the law with maximum transparency while protecting victims.
When you say follow the law, Madam Attorney General, do you mean that you will provide all the files by 30 days?
We will follow the law. The law passed both chambers last evening. It has not yet been signed, but we will continue to follow the law, again, while protecting victims, but also providing maximum transparency.
We're now joined by Matthew Verdum. He is an American journalist and he joins us live from Washington, D.C. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Of course, a significant moment in Donald Trump's second administration. This case has lingered over him for months now. Attorney General Pam Bondi has vowed full transparency when it comes to the release of these files. Do you think that we'll get that?
I think so, except that the law that was passed and that President Trump apparently just signed into law a few hours ago allows exceptions, allows for certain information to be redacted or blacked out, left out of the record. Stuff regarding that would jeopardize current government operations, like in the intelligence community, or that would have an impact on open investigations, and that may include some of the people who are actually mentioned in the Epstein files. And we're still not really sure what is in those files, but I guess we're going to find out in the next 30 days. But the President Trump had initially opposed the bill to require the disclosure of the Epstein files, but then he saw which way the wind was blowing, and he got behind it, and it passed Congress almost unanimously, and now he signed it into law.
Yes, and Matthew, of course, Donald Trump's bill signing ceremonies usually filled with pomp. This, however, not so much. Truth Social was released. What do you make of that? Matthew,
It's probably a strategic reason that he had that he signed the document behind doors without conducting an elaborate televised live signing ceremony. Perhaps because he's embarrassed that he opposed the legislation for so long, and then was forced politically to do an about face and endorse it. So I suspect he doesn't want to make a big deal out of it. Maybe he is expecting that his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is going to be quite aggressive in redacting information and not releasing it to the public. So he doesn't want to build up, I'm just guessing, doesn't want to build up expectations among the public about what they're going to find out. So, there's all sorts of reasons why he wouldn't have a signing ceremony. If he wanted to, there's no reason why he had to sign the law, within hours of its final approval. He could have held it off for a day or two and had a big signing ceremony with, TV cameras and everything in the Oval Office, but he chose not to do that. And my guess is that he's kind of embarrassed by the whole thing and just wishes it would go away. And so he didn't want to do a victory lap and celebrate the signing of the legislation.
Of course.
If that makes any sense.
Yes. And of course, Matthew, this has been a bipartisan issue. Americans from both the left and the right have wanted the release of these files. Some strong opposition from Donald Trump's MAGA base in regards to this, some of which have said that they've lost trust in the Trump administration for not releasing these files earlier. Do you think that those MAGA supporters are lost for good, or do you think he can regain back that trust in his core supporters?
I think that some of them are lost for good. I think that most of them are probably not lost for good. And that as long as there is a steady stream of information from these so-called Epstein files, most people will, except for the most aggressive conspiracy theorists, they're probably going to be satisfied. But there's a segment, and I don't know what percentage of those people are not going to be satisfied by this. They feel betrayed because he campaigned on greater government transparency, on releasing these Epstein files, and then he turned his back for a long time on that campaign promise, and only, in recent days came to support the legislation mandating the release of the files. So with some people, that trust is going to be lost forever, but I suspect that that's going to be a minority of his so-called mega supporters.
Yeah, and Matthew, some skeptics of this say that Donald Trump is going to find a way around redacting certain information, whether that be ongoing investigations, other alleyways, etc. Is there a possibility that Donald Trump will use some of these loopholes in order to redact some of this information that are in these files?
I don't think Donald Trump is making the decisions here. It's Pam Bondi, but you know, she is an arm of his administration, and if they're, I can't really say. I don't know if she's going to adhere to the spirit of the law and release, you know, almost everything quickly, or if she's going to make it, or if she's going to be reluctant to release certain information. She does have some discretion, as I said earlier, in that information that could be potentially harmful to the intelligence community or to open investigations that that the FBI or other agencies may be conducting may be withheld. So I'd like to think that she's going to approach this in a straightforward, honest way. I really can't say how she's going to handle it, but I can understand why some people would be suspicious of her and of President Trump at this point.
Yes, Matthew, do stay with us as we have further stories to discuss. But next, we turn to Europe, and Ukrainian Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko has said that at least 26 people have been killed and nearly 100 people have been injured in an overnight Russian drone and missile attack on the western Ukrainian city of Ternopil. Russia reportedly fired 476 drones and 48 missiles at Ukraine, striking energy and transport infrastructure and forcing emergency power cuts in a number of regions in frigid temperatures. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova has compared what she called the West's destruction of Ukraine to Hitler's plans annihilating the Slavs. Meanwhile, a Russian diplomat has stated that Russia is ready for the resumption of a dialogue with the United States regarding the nuclear arms reduction if appropriate conditions are prepared. Joining us once again is Matthew Verdum. Matthew, a huge strike on Ukraine, 26 people dead, 476 drones and 50 missiles in one night. What does that tell you about Russia's stockpile, production, their ongoing offensive into Ukrainian territory?
Well, Russia still wants to win this war against Ukraine, and I don't think Putin has been deterred, even though support from the United States has been kind of spotty at times. The United States is still supplying resources to Ukraine, and I really don't think Vladimir Putin is deterred by any of this, because he thinks Ukraine should be Russian sovereign territory, and he's not going to stop. He's not satisfied with getting the eastern part of Ukraine and getting access to Ukraine's ports, and he wants to finish the war off. Western support, particularly support from the United States, is preventing Russia from having a quick victory over Ukraine. But you know, I don't see any indication that Putin's will to prevail over Ukraine is dissipating at the moment.
Okay, Matthew Verdum, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you here on the programme. We now move on over to the Middle East, where in Gaza, at least 27 people were killed yesterday in one of the deadliest days since the fragile ceasefire took effect last month. Gaza's civil defense agency, operating under Hamas authority, reported 14 deaths in Gaza City, 13 in Khan Yunis. Hospitals contacted by the AFP news agency confirmed the figures. Israel says the strikes were a response to Hamas militants opening fire on troops in what it called a violation of the ceasefire agreement. Hamas denies that claim, calling the attacks a dangerous escalation that puts the truce at risk. The violence comes as Israel launched new strikes on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, despite a nearly year-long ceasefire there. Residents in Gaza described scenes of panic, destruction and fear as families who had just begun returning home were forced to flee again. The ceasefire, part of a US brokered deal linked to the next stage of President Donald Trump's peace plan, remains fragile. The conflict traces back to Hamas's October the 7th attack in 2023 that killed over 1,200 people, and Israel's ensuing offensive, which has resulted in more than 69,000 deaths in Gaza, according to the UN figures. Yossi Kapawasa joins us now. He's an Israeli intelligence and security expert, and he joins us live from Tel Aviv. Yossi, thank you very much for joining us. What more can you tell us about this incident which led to these huge strikes over the past day? 27 people dead in 24 hours in the Gaza enclave, meaning that this ceasefire remains ever more fragile. What more can you tell us, Yossi?
What's happening is that Hamas does not respect the ceasefire ever since it began. They carried out several terror attacks against us, and almost on a daily basis we are faced with terrorists who are trying to cross from the areas under Hamas control into the areas under our control in the Gaza Strip, where there are soldiers are deployed. So we carried out an attack against the person that was in charge of all these terror attacks, and in Gaza City and in Khan Yunis. And that's what has happened. We are trying to deliver a message to the Hamas people that they have to obey by the rules of this ceasefire. That's, I hope that message was well received.
The second phase of the ceasefire is coming up to be discussed. With ongoing events like these, do you see any hope for a transition to the first or the second phase?
Look, first of all, we have not finished the first phase. We are still waiting for 3 bodies of deceased hostages that are in the captivity of Hamas. We hope that this is going to be solved soon, but we cannot know if this is actually going to happen or not. They claim they don't know where they are, and we help them look for those bodies, including in the areas under our control, so far to no avail. And then comes the second phase, and in the second phase we see that there's a deadlock, because whereas the second phase starts with the disarmament of Hamas, Hamas refuses to disarm. And the international body that is supposed to take care of that, it has not been formed yet, and probably would not be formed before they know that Hamas is willing to disarm out of their own will. And we don't see any signs that this is going to be the case. So there's not going to be an international stabilization force that's supposed to take care of this challenge. And this would lead eventually to the question of whether Israel is going to take action in order to disarm Hamas by force or not, and to what extent we are going to get the green light from the United States to do that. Because otherwise the entire plan, beautiful plan that's supposed to bring peace to the Middle East, is not going to be implemented. And this is a pity for everybody, including the Palestinians and Israelis, and there are other people of the Middle East and globally. So it's all about whether Hamas is going to be ready to disarm. There was supposed to be a meeting between the Palestinian leaders of Hamas, Khalil al-Khaya, and the envoy, the American envoy, Steve Witkoff. Yesterday in Istanbul, in the last moment, this was decided not to hold it. So it's hard to see how we move forward from here.
Yossi, do you realistically see Hamas laying down its arms and disarming willingly, given the fact that Israel conducts operations that kill 27 people in 24 hours, which you said is sending a message.
Yeah, that's, we didn't kill 27 people. We killed the commander of the Hamas battalion in Gaza City and his entourage. That's what we killed. It's not ordinary people. And I think this is going to be a message to them, but whether they're going to receive it or not, as I said, I'm not sure. It's, and the chances that they are going to disarm by their own will are, for the time being, low. And they refuse to do that, and we hope that mediators, especially Turkey and Qatar, who are very close to Hamas, and Egypt, who also has a leverage on Hamas, will be able to convince them to do that. Because this is what they promised the United States is going to be done. This entire plan is based on the willingness of Hamas to disarm that was expressed in front of the Americans, both directly and through the mediators. If they back off and they decide not to do that, then there's a big question mark of whether this plan is going to be implemented or whether Israel is going to be asked to do the job by itself. And as President Trump said when he presented the plan in the first place, that Israel would have to finish the job with the full American backing. We'll see if this is going to happen.
Disarming by force,
anyhow,
would that be?
Anyhow, I'd say anyhow, if we are not, even if we are not going to do that, the situation is going to be such that the rest of the elements that comprise the plan, including the reconstruction of Gaza, is not going to take place.
Disarming by force, would that mean a complete resumption of the war in the same conduct that was previously taking place on a daily basis prior to this October the 10th ceasefire?
This would mean that, the Gaza Strip is divided today between us and Hamas. And this would mean that we shall have to take over control over the areas governed by Hamas, and mainly the Gaza City, which we didn't do that in previous part of the war. And but this time we're going to do that, if we are going to do that. We're going to do that without having to worry about the fate of the hostages, because the living hostages have been released. And with full American backing, that's important, and with the understanding of the rest of the world, that we gave a chance to for Hamas to disarm themselves and to allow the people of Gaza to enjoy the benefits of this plan. They refuse to do that, and if this is going to be the case, I guess the international community is going to understand why there is a need for military action in order to disarm Hamas.
Okay, Yossi Kapawasa, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. We now move on, and the United Nations General Assembly has adopted a resolution reaffirming global support for the Olympic truce ahead of the 2026 Winter Games in Italy. The measure, passed by consensus, urges all member states to uphold the historic commitment to peace, dialogue and unity through sport. Ahead of the vote, Giovanni Malago, the president of the Milano Cortina 2026 Foundation, has called on nations to see the upcoming Games as a beacon of hope, an alternative to rivalry and division. International Olympic Committee President Kirsty Coventry has also addressed the Assembly, drawing on her personal journey from a young swimmer in Zimbabwe to an Olympic champion. She stressed that protecting athletes from political interference is essential to preserving the integrity of the Olympic movement. Coventry has warned that restricting athlete visas or blocking participation for political reasons threatens the core principles of the Games. Speaking to reporters after the resolution passed, she said the IOC remains committed to ensuring that competitors from all regions can come together in a peaceful manner to be able to compete. Let's take a listen in.
The power of sport is there to be able to really build bridges and to unite us. And this is what we believe in the Olympic movement. And so we are going to continue to ensure that we allow for athletes from every part of our world to come together in a peaceful manner to be able to compete.
Now we move on to North America, and Mexican authorities have announced the arrest of an alleged mastermind in the assassination of a popular opposition mayor Carlos Manzo, a vocal critic of the government's security policies, whose murder has shocked the country and sparked mass protests. Manzo, the mayor of Uruapan in the major state of Michoacan, was shot and killed during a public Day of the Dead celebration on November the 1st while he was with his family. Manzo had repeatedly accused the federal government of failing to act against organised crime. Security Minister Omar Garcia Harfuch identified the detainee as Jorge Armando N., withholding his last name as in custom in Mexico. He said investigations linked to the man to a criminal group in Michoacan, which works for the powerful Jalisco New Generation cartel. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome, I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching the NewsX Eurozone. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Senior Pentagon officials led by Army Secretary Dan Driscoll has arrived in Kyiv to meet President Zelensky and to discuss efforts to end the war with Russia. The visit comes as reports emerge of a new peace plan and after a Russian strike kills at least 26 people in Ternopil. Ukraine says at least 26 people have been killed and dozens are missing after Russian drone and missile strikes hit apartment blocks in Ternopil. Officials say nearly 100 are injured as Russia launches hundreds of drones and missiles damaging energy and transport sites. Italy's top court approves the extradition of Ukrainian suspect Serhiy Kuznetsov to Germany to face anti-constitutional sabotage charges over the Nord Stream blasts. Prosecutors say he led a team that planted explosives in 2022, a case that could strain relations between Kyiv and Berlin. The Kremlin says there are no formal peace talks with the United States on Ukraine, adding it has nothing new to say about a reported 28-point plan. Moscow insists any settlement must address what it calls the root causes of the war and criticizes European nuclear rhetoric, while noting Putin does not use AI himself. Two passenger trains collided in the Czech Republic, seriously injuring 5 people and lightly wounding around 40 others. Officials say all passengers are evacuated. In initial reports suggest that one train may have passed a stop signal. The rival Greek and Turkish Cypriot leaders say they are ready to meet the UN Secretary General to discuss reviving long-stalled peace talks. The two leaders hold their first meeting since October's election and agree to pursue further contacts ahead of the UN envoy's visit in December. Hungary's Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó says the EU should hold funding to Ukraine after reports of widespread corruption. He criticizes the European Commission for seeking more aid, calling further payments insane ahead of a meeting in Brussels. A Spanish court orders Meta to pay 479 million euros to 87 digital media outlets for unfair competition and breaching EU data rules. Judges say Meta gained an illegal advantage by using personal data for targeted ads as a separate parliamentary probe begins. Now for this hour, we start with US President Donald Trump has said that he has signed a bill requiring his administration to release government-held documents related to the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Trump, who had initially opposed the measure, reversed course as the legislation gained momentum in the Congress. He has announced that the signing on his Truth Social platform, declaring he had just signed the bill to release the Epstein Files. The move follows comments from U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, who vowed maximum transparency after both chambers of Congress, now under Republican control, voted to mandate the release. Bondi has confirmed the Justice Department will publish its Epstein-related materials within 30 days, as the law requires. The release is expected to shed new light on Epstein's activities before and after his 2008 conviction. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Professor Andy Latham. He's an international relations expert, joins us live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Professor, what more is happening and how are people in U.S. excited about this, this change or this new news that has come in?
Yes, if you dislike Donald Trump, this is welcome news. The anticipation is that things will be revealed that will cast a very negative light on the current president. We have to wait and see, of course. It may not be as negative as some people think. But yes, there is a level of excitement now, both around the president's change of tone yes, he's supporting the release of these documents, but also the prospect of what is contained in those documents, which might, as I said, reflect very negatively on President Trump.
And Professor, what do you think, what changed Trump's mind in, first, of course, initially he was, during his campaign, he was very much on the side of, yes, I will be disclosing it if I become a president, and then he changed, and now he changed again. What do you think happened?
I think, to be charitable, he's trying to make a virtue of necessity. There is no way in which the legislators want to be tarred with this particular brush. They really, really, really want to distance themselves from anything to do with Epstein and the scandals, the sexual abuse and all of that. So this was going to go through both the House and the Senate, no matter what President Trump said. And so I think he cagily figured that he needed to get on the right side of things and simply go along with what was inevitable and irrevocable. It was just simply going to happen. Making a virtue of necessity, I think, is the best way to frame President Trump's recent take on this.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Professor Andrew Latham for joining us and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. Kremlin has said that consultations or negotiations with the United States on possible Ukraine peace are not taking place. Meanwhile, it has not said anything on whether or not Russian President Putin has been briefed on the reported 28-point Ukraine peace plan. It has added that any settlement between Russia and Ukraine must lead to the elimination of the root causes of the conflict. This comes as senior Pentagon officials, led by U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, have arrived in Kyiv to discuss efforts to end the war with Russia. Now, meanwhile, the Russian parliament has said that assets of non-residents from unfriendly countries could be used to compensate for losses in case of confiscation of Russian assets by the European Union. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry has said that its forces have downed 4 Shadow missiles. They've added that Russian forces have now taken control of Vesel in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region. Now, for this discussion, we welcome Dmytro Burtsev. He's a junior research fellow at Institute of Oriental Studies of Ukraine, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, what do you think, what can we expect from the visit of U.S. delegation or officials in Russia?
Well, I suppose United States have their own suggestions about what they can give for Ukraine and what Ukraine should expect from negotiations. And actually, if you know the position of the President Donald Trump, it's very stable. He sees himself as a peacemaker, so making the peace in Ukraine actually at the moment is one of his primary targets. So actually all of the parties, they're looking for the way to finish the war as soon as possible. However, the demands of and claims of each side, if you look United States, Europe, Russia, Ukraine, they were different, and it's very difficult to put everything together in the same box.
Right. And do you think that anything that can come out of these talks could be effective realistically?
Well, theoretically speaking, yes, but from my point of view, the Russia should feel the real sanctions and real work of sanctions. So because as we can see, current sanctions, they don't work properly, and United States and the President Trump actually they see sanctions as the only way at the moment, but at the same time they want to have some kind of negotiations, and actually they want each side, Ukraine and Russia ceasefire. However, it's easy to say but very difficult to do. Very difficult because of Russian and Ukrainian aims are different.
And as you mentioned about more sanctions or further sanctions, we already know that there have been 19 sanctions that's put towards Russia. Do you think the next one could be more effective?
Perhaps the current oil sanctions of the United States, they might be the most efficient, but Russians, I suppose they were expected something like that, so they were looking the way of backdoors how to overcome these new sanctions. And as we can see, their military production is growing, and it's really much higher. The scope is much higher than it was even during the first year of war. So we can see that Russia has made a really good preparation to the war. I mean, at least they have a good resource base to continue the war, I suppose, for at least a year. So it's very difficult to say how sanctions can work and which other backdoors Russians can find. And of course, Russia also relies on China on a lot of aspects. So I suppose Chinese hand also might be helpful for Russia in some aspects of that.
And Mr. Burtsev, how might the absence of Ukraine in the U.S.-Russia consultations, how do you think this will affect any broader diplomatic efforts?
Well, you see, it's not only the United States and Russia. We also have the European Union, which has its own positions, and actually Europeans might not be happy to be outside of the table and to be discussed, because actually the United States are very far from the place, and the European Union, and particularly such countries as Poland and Baltic countries, they see Russia as a potential threat in the nearest future. And of course, they press another EU member states to deal with the issue. And it's very difficult to say, because Ukraine might, if this consultation really happens, it's very difficult to say if Ukraine will really accept these conditions, or they will rely on European allies to be somehow to counter this negotiation. But I suppose all unofficial talks or talks we don't know, they take place even between Ukraine and Russia, if we speak about the terms of exchange of prisoners of war or some very specific issues. So I suppose it might be some channels even between Ukraine and Russia. And of course, even though relations between the United States and Russia became much colder after 2022 and Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but I suppose they still had a lot of specific routes of communication, means of communication, other than official diplomatic ones.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Dmytro Burtsev for joining us as our Junior Research Fellow of Institute of Oriental Studies of Ukraine from Taipei. Thank you very much. Now we stay in the region. Ukrainians in Kyiv have dismissed a reported U.S. plan to end the war with Russia that would require Kyiv to give up territory and cut its armed forces. This comes as Washington has reportedly signaled to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that Kyiv must accept a U.S.-drafted framework to end the nearly 4-year-old war. Now, some Kyiv residents said the proposed U.S. peace plan was unacceptable for Ukraine and would not be supported by society or the military. Let's listen in.
Вважаю ці умови прийнятними і не думаю, що навіть якщо така домовленість там умовно буде досягнута на рівні керівників держав, що це буде сприйнято людьми, що це буде сприйнято військом і тими, хто вже багато віддав і віддає за це.
Я не знаю, чи Зеленський піде на такі умови. Я сподіваюся, що ні. Звичайно, ці умови неприйнятні для України. Я вважаю, що Україна має повернутися все-таки до кордонів 91-го року, як мінімум. Ну і, звичайно, треба агресора цього добивати, дожимати, тому що я впевнений, що якщо зараз якісь поступки ми дамо їм, то вони по-любому потім повернуться, як то було і в Чечні.
Now we move on to our next news. China has welcomed the Dutch government's decision to suspend its seizure of Nexperia. the Chinese-owned chipmaker based in the Netherlands, but said the move still falls short of a full resolution. Chinese Commerce Ministry spokesperson He Yong-kyun told reporters in Beijing on Thursday that the suspension was positive and that there is still a gap from a complete solution. He has accused the Netherlands of causing turbulence in global semiconductor supply chains and has urged Dutch authorities to resolve the issue swiftly. The easing of Dutch control over Nexperia was described by China as a first step in the right direction. Following talks between these two governments, however, Beijing has said that it had hoped for the complete withdrawal of the administrative order that initially triggered the intervention. Both sides say they hope continued dialogue can prevent further disruption to the already strained global chip supply chain.
关于你提到的安氏半导体问题，我们昨天已经在商务部网站发布了相关消息，你可以查阅。我想强调的是，造成当前全球半导体供应链混乱的源头和责任在何方。何方主动暂停行政令，中方表示欢迎。这是向妥善解决问题的正确方向迈出的第一步，但距离彻底解决问题还有差距。希望何方继续展现合作诚意，切实采取实际行动，迅速且有效推动安氏半导体问题早日解决，恢复全球半导体产供链的安全与稳定。
Now we move on to UK. Britain's Defence Minister John Healey says the UK is prepared to act if the Russian spy ship Yantar poses a threat after RAF pilots monitoring the vessel were targeted with lasers. Healey has called the incident deeply dangerous and confirmed that military options are ready should the ship alter course towards British interests. The Yantar, known for intelligence gathering and undersea cable mapping, is currently positioned just outside British waters, north of Scotland. Healey has said that this is the first time the ship has directed lasers at British aircraft and has ordered changes to naval rules of engagement to allow closer tracking. The Russian embassy has dismissed the accusations as unfounded, insisting Moscow has no interest in Britain's underwater communications and urging London to avoid steps that could heighten tensions. With monitoring now intensified, the UK says it is taking the vessel's movements extremely seriously. Let's listen in.
As I speak, a Russian spy ship, the Yantar, is on the edge of UK waters north of Scotland, having entered the UK's wider waters over the last few weeks. This is a vessel designed for gathering intelligence and mapping our undersea cables. We deployed a Royal Navy frigate and RAF P-8 planes to monitor and track this vessel's every move, during which the Yantar directed lasers at our pilots. That Russian action is deeply dangerous, and this is the second time this year that this ship, the Yantar, has deployed to UK waters. So my message to Russia and to Putin is this: we see you, we know what you're doing, and if the Yantar travels south this week, we are ready.
Britain's Defence Minister John Healey says the UK is prepared to act if the Russian spy ship Yantar poses a threat after RAF pilots monitoring the vessel were targeted with lasers. Healey has called the incident deeply dangerous and confirmed that military options are ready should the ship alter course towards British interests. The Yantar, known for intelligence gathering and undersea cable mapping, is currently positioned just outside British waters, north of Scotland. Healey has also said that this is the first time the ship has directed lasers at British aircraft and has ordered changes to naval rules of engagement to allow closer tracking. The Russian embassy dismissed the accusations as unfounded, insisting Moscow has no interest in Britain's underwater communications and urging London to avoid steps that could heighten tensions. With monitoring now intensified, the UK says it is taking the vessel's movement extremely seriously. Now we move on to Germany. Germany's Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has attended the rollout of the first Leopard 2A8 tank in Munich, declaring that modern wars will not be purely drone wars. The unveiling took place in the presence of German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, Bavarian Prime Minister Dr. Markus Söder, Norwegian State Secretary Marte Gerhardsen, and several other international guests. The newly presented systems are scheduled to enter service beginning in 2026. Let's listen into what the German Defense Minister has said.
Viele Partnernationen haben den Leopard 2A8 bereits bestellt. Litauen, die Niederlande, Tschechien und auch Norwegen. Auch die heutige Gästeliste zeigt, der Leo ist ein wichtiger Eckpfeiler in der europäischen Verteidigung. Und gleichzeitig bin ich davon überzeugt, diese wichtigen Kooperationen sollten wir nicht auf den Leopard begrenzen. Wir sehen, wie wichtig ein moderner und durchhaltefähiger Raketenartillerieverbund ist. Wir sollten daher in Europa, gerade auch mit Partnern wie Norwegen, mit denen wir traditionell und besonders eng zusammenarbeiten, weitere Projekte prüfen.
And that's a wrap on the NewsX Eurozone. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
Japan-China dispute intensifies over Taiwan security. Economic pressure escalates amid diplomatic freeze. Taiwan's fate central to regional stability. Military posturing deepens East Asia tensions. Historic grievances fuel geopolitical clashes.
Hello, you're watching another episode of Explained with me, Asuma Katauka. What was once a simmering disagreement has now erupted into a full diplomatic freeze as Japan's security stance on Taiwan clashes with China's territorial ambitions. The consequences are beginning to ripple across trade, travel, and international relations. At the heart of this dispute is Taiwan. with Prime Minister Takaichi suggesting that Japan could intervene militarily if China attacked the island. While her statement was intended to reinforce Japan's commitment to regional security, it has sparked one of the most serious clashes between the two nations in years. The fallout has already caused economic disruptions and led to travel warnings, flight cancellations, and a halt in seafood imports, signs that the diplomatic confrontation is far from over. What sparked the rift? The catalyst for this escalating crisis was Prime Minister Takaichi's comments linking Taiwan's security directly with Japan's survival. She stated that if China were to attack Taiwan, it would present a survival-threatening situation for Japan, potentially justifying military intervention. Let's listen in.
我想强调的是，日本首相高市早苗的涉台错误言论，从根本上损害了中日关系的政治基础，激起了中国人民的公愤和谴责。中方严肃敦促日方收回错误言论，停止在涉华问题上制造事端，以实际行动认错纠偏，维护中日关系的政治基础。 如果日方拒不撤回，甚至一错再错，中方将不得不采取严厉坚决的反制措施。据我了解，日方此前承诺履行输华水产品的监管责任，保障产品质量安全，这是日本水产品输华的先决条件。但是日方目前未能提供所承诺的技术材料。 我还想强调的是，近期由于日本首相高市早苗倒行逆施，在台湾等重大问题上错误言论，引起中国民众的强烈公愤。当前形势下，即使日本水产品向中，
Takaichi's remarks were met with strong condemnation from Beijing, which labeled them as egregious and accused Japan of trying to rekindle its militaristic past. China has demanded Japan retract the statement, further inflaming tensions. Escalating rhetoric and threats, the rhetoric surrounding the dispute has only grown more intense. A Chinese diplomat even posted a now deleted threatening comment about cutting off the dirty neck of Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi on social media, a remark that Japan strongly protested. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has doubled down, demanding a full retraction of Takaichi's statement and warning of more repercussions if Japan fails to comply. China has warned it may take severe and resolute countermeasures if Japan does not retract what it called wrongful remarks by Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi on Taiwan, which Beijing says undermines the political foundation of bilateral ties, speaking at a news briefing. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning also cited public anger as a reason for a potential ban on all Japanese seafood imports. Let's listen in.
据我了解，日方此前承诺履行输华水产品的监管责任，保障产品质量安全，这是日本水产品输华的先决条件。但是日方目前未能提供所承诺的技术材料。 我还想强调的是，近期由于日本首相高市早苗倒行逆施，在台湾等重大问题上错误言论，引起中国民众的强烈公愤。当前形势下，即使日本水产品向中国出口，也。
In response, Japanese officials have refused to back down, standing firm on the country's position regarding Taiwan. The stark exchange of demands has made it clear that this diplomatic standoff is unlikely to be resolved easily. The economic impact this diplomatic rift is also having serious economic consequences. China has issued a travel advisory warning its citizens against visiting Japan, leading to cancelled group tours and sharp decline in tourism. Japan's retail and tourism stocks have been hit hard as a result. Even more troubling, the impact has extended to trade relations. China's decision to suspend imports of Japanese seafood and halt film approvals signals the growing economic fallout from the dispute. These actions are a clear attempt by China to use economic pressure to force Japan to change its position. Additionally, Japan's economic dependence on China further complicates matters. China is a crucial trade partner for Japan, both as a market for goods and key source of rare earth metals. This economic interdependence adds a layer of complexity to the diplomatic role, as both sides navigate the delicate balance between security concerns and economic realities. The broader context of the dispute, this crisis, is, however, more than just Taiwan. It's deeply rooted in long-standing tensions between these two nations, including territorial disputes over the Senkaku, Diaoyu Islands, as well as historical grievances dating back to World War II. But with China's rise as a global power and Japan's evolving security strategy, the stakes are higher than ever. In an attempt to de-escalate the situation, Japan sent a senior official to Beijing for talks. Despite these